and welcome to the first devlog for my solo game project, Westbound. I started about a year ago working on and off because of my day job and life in general. I recently got inspired to do devlogs after seeing others on YouTube, and I figured I'd start sharing my journey for those interested in game dev. I've got quite a bit to cover in this first episode, considering that I've done a few things already on the game, and I won't be super in-depth, but I'm hoping to have a blog for more of the inside details for those people who are curious about how I solve certain problems. Little bit of a disclaimer though, I've never made a game before and I have no idea of best practices. I'm clearly the best man for the job, so let's get to it. So, what is Westbound? Well, first of all, it's a simulation game with elements of transport systems and business management. A lot of the inspiration for this game comes from games like Chris Sawyer's Locomotion, and as well as Roller Coaster Tycoon, which I absolutely loved as a kid. And more recently, Factorio, which is an absolute gem if you haven't played it yet. Secondly, I want it to be story-driven, and set primarily in the Wild West. I really like the aesthetic of this era, and I think it's a great backdrop for the story. I find that simulation games can be quite heavy on the number goals, and I would really like to drive the player maybe more with story and see how that goes. Thirdly and finally, it's my own engine in OpenGL written in C++. I'm using Microsoft Visual Studio for the code editor and Aseprite for the sprite editing as well as animations. That about does it for an introduction to the game. Let's now go over the progress made on the game so far. Since the game is going to be in an isometric view, I sketched a few drawings out about how I want it to look and work, and drew a desert tile, and looked up some OpenGL tutorials, and drew my first few tiles on the screen. Here I have a 2D array of tile locations, and I just draw them from back to front, with the Z index increasing as we go down. I then drew a ground piece to sit under the desert tiles, and I drew a couple of them under each tile, so it then looked like this. Next up, I wanted to look at the landscape manipulation mechanic. I based a lot of this off of Chris Sawyer's Locomotion. So I drew all the different states that the tiles could be in, with the 4 corner heights of a desert tile dictating what texture to draw. I then needed to tell if the game cursor was within the actual tile, and using a simple equation of what side of a line a point is, I could easily tell that. I drew all the corner hovers for all the tiles you have, as well as all the different hover states for just the general blocks. This is what it ended up looking like. I'm quite happy with the way that it works, with dragging the mouse up and down to change the heights. Also picking up corner hovers seemed to work very nicely. I drew some water tiles for a bit of variety in the scenery, and whenever the tiles go below a certain height level, then water appears, which I think looks pretty nifty. The track system is an important part of the game, and I looked to a lot of other games for inspiration on how they did theirs. And it really took me a long time to implement. Loads of sprites were drawn and a ton of reworks happened. Eventually I got something down that works quite well for now. First off, I drew a simple track piece with rails, sleepers and ballast. And then with this style I could then draw all the different turns and pieces that exist in the game. I had to break up all the larger sprites into their individual tiles for the desert. I then had a track settings file which dictates how the tracks are placed, as well as what they can and cannot connect to. And here's the final result. As you can see, the cursor has been replaced by the initial track you can place, and the person can then cycle through the different turns they're allowed to select from the current placement state. I then went on to design the above ground track system with support systems that I needed to draw for each piece, and it ended up looking like this, with the player being able to raise and lower the tracks at will, with beams being drawn below based on the height of the track itself. I also added the ability to place tracks under other tracks as long as they have a valid combination, and the beams are then removed. At this point I was on a pretty good roll, so I decided to add tunnels to the track placement system. This will allow players to build tracks into the ground as long as there's enough height clearance, and also gives a little bit of a see-through view to see what's been placed and what they are placing. With the track system done, I decided to go for some easy wins. For scenery, I drew a couple of desert scenery sprites and I let them spawn randomly on the map tiles. This really gave the game a little bit more character than just yellow desert tiles. I then made sure when editing the landscape that the scenery is then destroyed. As well as when adding train tracks, it will also destroy the scenery wherever you place them. I added a player money system and I needed a few sprites for it, so I drew the numbers and I placed the player's current money at the top right corner. And now whenever something is placed, then it costs the player a bit of money, as well as different amounts for different tracks and also removing scenery. I took on the animation system at this point. I currently load all the animation frames into a texture array in OpenGL, and every cycle just update the relevant animations to the next frame. These animation frame updates are tightly coupled to the frame rate at this point. I'm not really sure how else to approach this. And now with this animation system I created a main menu, and it doesn't really do much other than just starts a new game or exits the game. I then added a destruction mode, which you can destroy what you've built for a fraction of the price. With the systems of tracks in place, I could easily add road systems, which will be used for horses and wagons and such. And also the ability to destroy was easy to add as well. Roads don't behave exactly like tracks, they can't go up and down, but I allowed them to build over rivers, creating bridges much like this, which I think is quite nice so the player isn't limited by water. Terrain generation is a really good way of giving your world a little bit more character and making it a little bit more believable. A lot of terrain generation uses things like the Perlin noise and also a diamond square algorithm, the latter of which I have done in a 3D software renderer I wrote a while back. I will leave a link in the description below if you're interested to see that. My terrain generation is quite simple. It consists of hills and rivers or lakes. Hills will consist of rectangles which will be given random width, length and height attributes. Rivers and lakes will be a line with random length, depth, width and variance. The variance will dictate the randomness of the river's flow. Here's a few examples of hills that are generated with this. I think this is the direction I want to go with. I don't want ultra realistic landscape, but I just wanted some landscape generation. I'm very happy with the water generation side of things though, and as you can see, if it goes out the one end, it still comes out the other. For more world things, I had town generation using something called the L system, and using that I had rules to create towns and villages. Towns will start at a given point and it will propagate forward while having a chance of branching to either side. Villages will have a central point and they will propagate outwards rather, with chances of spawning different buildings as they go. And here's some towns that were generated using this method. I only have one town building at the moment, so that's why it kind of looks a bit generic. And here are some villages as well. And finally, here's what it looks like all together. That about does it for this initial devlog. I know it was a bit rushed and there was a lot to get through, but I'm hoping to continue doing this and doing it more regularly with less to cover, and I can go a little bit more in depth each episode. Also, feel free to comment and let me know what you think. Maybe there's something you want to see more of in future episodes. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what you saw, give it a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe. See you next time. Bye bye.